Stop leeching off me, you deadbeat.
For over 20 years, I thought I had been devoted to Ted. Yet, this is what he really thought of me. I wasn't parasitic. I was merely devoted to him. Despite thinking this, I couldn't find the words to say. As my strength drained away, Ted continued.
Now that Ryan has a job, you have no reason to leech off me, right?
That
Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses.
Ted raised his voice. Oh, it's no use. My feelings didn't reach him. Just as I thought this, I heard a snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that bound my heart breaking. At the same time, my feelings for Ted began to fade. We were spouses just moments ago now. We're like strangers. Ted had been using me from the start. He never loved me. If he did, he wouldn't blatantly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. No, I must utterly defeat him. With my resolve set, I looked up and stared directly at Ted. My name is Karen Williams. I am a 50-year-old housewife, and I've been married to Ted for 25 years. Our son Ryan, who was born a few years after we got married, graduated from college and started working this year. Now that child rearing is behind me, I can do what I want. That's what I'm thinking now. But there's just one problem. It is my relationship with Ted. Ted is neither a good husband nor a good father. In fact, it's hard to find any good in him. He cheats, and he doesn't even bring a decent paycheck home. Can you at least bring home enough for living expenses?
Huh? Don't talk back to me when you're living off me.
Ted always snaps back like this. Maybe it's hopeless. Maybe divorce is the only option. I've been thinking about it more and more lately. But it's not easy to bring up divorce. The thing is, my FIL, who is currently hospitalized and unwell, asked me to look after Ted. I owe it to your father, Ron. I must endure as long as I can. Ron's words can't be ignored. But my desire to divorce is strong. Amidst these conflicting feelings, I remembered the happy times before marriage. The start of my pre-wedding happiness came from the tough times my dad faced. My family owned a small restaurant. My dad was in charge of cooking, and my mom served the guests. Of course, the food was always delicious. However, my father was incredibly bad at business. He wanted to feed his customers to their heart's content. That's why he started the restaurant. It was a noble thought. But that was all he had going for the business. That's why my dad hardly thought about profitability. It didn't matter if the profits were slim. If the customers are happy and think the food is delicious, that's enough. That was the kind of business we had. It was a business destined not to make much money, naturally. And so, our family's finances were always in dire straits. Even so, I was proud as a child to see customers leaving satisfied. That's why I never interfered with my dad's business approach. However, during my college years, a crisis occurred. The company supplying ingredients to my dad's restaurant went bankrupt due to the recession.
We've already paid for this month's supplies. Without them, we might have to close our shop.
Our family business was already on the edge. There was no extra money to spare. Seeing my parents so downhearted made me feel anxious too. But as a college student, There was nothing much I could do. It seemed unlikely that the bankrupt company would be able to refund any money. The only option left for us was to close the restaurant. That's when a regular customer at the shop said,
Closing down? Such a shame with food this good. It'd be a waste.
But with the supplier gone bankrupt, we're about to take on debt too.
Then let me help you out personally, and you can revive the place.
This regular, truly out of the blue, offered my father a sum of money to help.
It's a lifesaver. We'll definitely pay you back.
Don't worry about the money anytime soon. Just keep making that delicious food.
After saying this, he quickly left the shop. Later, my father started trading with another food wholesaler. This one was a major distributor, and the costs were lower than before. Fortuitously, this helped our family restaurant avoid bankruptcy. About a year later, I went with my father to repay the man. While my father was talking with him, a young man approached me.
My dad lent you some money, didn't he?
Turns out, he was the son of the man who helped us. He was named Ted and worked at his father's company.
You're pretty. Want to go out with me sometime?
Me? With you?
Why not? Think of it as a way to say thanks for the loan.
It's true that we were saved by the loan, but my dad had already thanked him properly. I didn't owe him anything more. Yet Ted whispered in my ear,
The daughter of a restaurant owner being ungrateful. I could spread that word if you like.
"That's not fair." I couldn't retort. Even if he did spread rumors, it wouldn't really affect me. But it might trouble my dad. And what would the customers think? Thinking this over, I couldn't refuse Ted's offer. I didn't like it, but I decided to endure it this one time. With that thought, I went out with Ted. And surprisingly, it turned out to be more enjoyable than I expected. Ted was engaging and knew a lot of fun places to go. The places he chose had great taste. Despite a terrible first impression, he might actually be a good guy. That's when I realized my luck had run out. I was quickly charmed by Ted.
It's fun being with you, Karen.
I'm having fun too.
For a serious and nice girl like you, Karen, I thought for the first time I could marry.
Swept up by such simple words, I started dating Ted with marriage in mind. Ted continued to charm me with every trick in the book. Eventually, a few years later, I found myself married to him. Naturally, I never thought at the beginning that it was all a trap by Ted. He was genuinely kind, and I felt loved by him. But it was all a lie. As soon as we got married, Ted changed completely.
Here's this month's paycheck. Make it last.
I opened the envelope Ted handed me. Inside was a pay stub. The salary itself was directly deposited into the bank, so having just the stub was not unusual. However, one strange thing was that the pay stub was handwritten. Nowadays, that's almost unheard of. But I got married 25 years ago. When computers were just becoming common, handwritten stubs weren't so odd back then. There's over $1,000 here, that's reasonable, right? I muttered to myself as if to convince myself. I managed to make do with the little money we had. Over the course of our marriage, I began to sense little oddities. One was Ted's daily routine. He left the house at the same time every morning but came home at irregular hours. It was different every day.
I'm busy handling various jobs as my father's successor.
Then, could you call before coming home?
Stop nagging. All right, I'll call.
Ted raised his voice. His attitude made me feel even more uneasy. He might have been fooling around. Maybe he even had an affair. Although I thought this, I didn't confront him because I hated being yelled at. In the end, I remained silent despite my doubts about Ted's behavior. Then Ryan was born. I thought having a child might change things. But Ted's attitude remained unchanged. Looking back, I think that was when I began to consider divorce. It was around the time Ryan started middle school. I was out shopping for dinner when my mom called me. "What? Dad's in the hospital?" It was a call to inform me that my father was hospitalized. I rushed to the hospital in a panic.
Mom just exaggerated over the phone.
Dad laughed heartily as he spoke. I felt relieved. But in that moment, I remembered something, and my heart skipped a beat. Shoot, I forgot to call Ted. It was already too late. There were countless missed calls from Ted on my cell phone. In a panic, I called him back, only to hear Ted's irritable voice.
Where are you and what are you doing? Hurry back and make my dinner.
"I'm sorry, but I just found out something about my dad."
What? Your dad? You mean your father?
Ted asked in a stern voice. I answered in a small voice. Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized.
So what? That doesn't matter. You're my wife.
I flinched and shut my eyes at Ted's loud voice. I was scared of being yelled at, but I couldn't just stay silent. I gathered my courage and responded, "Isn't it okay to be worried about my dad? I should be allowed that much, right?"
Shut up. Don't talk back to me.
"No, I will say it. You would rush to your own father, wouldn't you?" Ted fell silent when I asked him this. Putting himself in my shoes must have hit close to home. I thought so, but Ted's response was beyond belief.
What? I'd ignore my father if he was hospitalized. I wouldn't care if he wasn't around.
I was speechless. That had to be a lie. Though I wanted to deny it, I couldn't. After much hesitation, I told Ted, "I'm not like you. Sorry, but you'll need to eat out tonight." That was all I could manage to say. I hung up the phone, still in a daze. From that incident, I truly began to doubt Ted. That was when I finally realized that the happy times before our marriage were all an illusion. Oh, I see. Ted wanted a housekeeper, not a wife. Saying it out loud made me sad. But I couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for myself. That's right. If I'm going to divorce, I need to get prepared. I started preparing for a divorce. And a few years later, this time, it was my Phil who ended up in the hospital. Moreover, his condition is quite serious. He might not be able to leave the hospital. I relayed the medical condition as described by the doctor to Ted, but he was unfazed.
Does it mean it's going to cost us money?
This isn't the time to worry about money. Don't you get it?
I get it. I'll call my brother.
Ted contacted my Bill. Bill was married but had no children. So, unable to cover the hospital bills, Ted spoke to his brother.
Can you pay for it? It's tough for us with both Ryan and Karen to support.
He spoke as if it were someone else's problem. At the same time, I remembered when my father was hospitalized. It seemed Ted really didn't care about his fill. I couldn't stand it anymore. That's it. I'll manage somehow and pay for your dad's hospital bills myself,
Don't forget what you just said.
Ted yelled. I nodded firmly. My statement ended up committing us to pay for my Phil's hospital bills. Additionally, my Phil decided to step down as president due to his illness, and Ted took over. Regardless, Ted wasn't pleased with me taking charge. Since then, he blatantly started avoiding coming home. It was the same when discussing Ryan's future plans. Ted would ignore my calls and not come home.
Dad's not coming home again today.
I'm sorry, Ryan. I know this is a hassle.
It's okay. I don't care about Dad much. More importantly, I want to go to college in New York.
That's right. Don't worry about tuition, I'll handle it. Soon after, Ryan's admission to a college in New York was settled. As expected, Ted did not see him off. Once Ryan moved to New York, the house felt incredibly empty. By then, Ted was only coming home about once a week. Can you transfer a little more for your dad's hospital bills?
What? I've already transferred more than half my salary. It should be enough since it's just you now.
The money Ted transferred was only a fraction of his salary. It's obviously just a fraction of his salary. Claiming it's more than half is definitely a lie. I knew this, but I no longer had the energy to complain. A few years later, I received news that Ryan got a job. Now that Ryan has a job, maybe it's time we talked about divorce. I had prepared for this moment over the years. Now it was just about timing. How can I bring it up without causing a fuss? That was all that ran through my mind. It shouldn't be about whether it causes a fuss or not. I chuckled ruefully to myself. Then one day, after visiting my Phil in the hospital, I chatted with my Phil as usual and then headed home as usual. As I went to unlock the front door, I paused. Surprisingly, it was already open. Could it be a burglar? Tentatively peering inside, I heard the TV and Ted's laughter coming from the living room. Relieved that Ted was actually home, I entered the living room. There was Ted, laughing heartily at the TV. You were home.
Yeah, I thought I'd tidy up the place a bit.
Tidy up? At Ted's comment, I looked around. Upon closer inspection, several things were missing from the room. Wait, it seems like some things are missing.
Yeah, I threw them out. Your stuff.
You threw them out? My things? Shocked, I went back to my room. The room was empty. No computer, no TV, not even my favorite mug. Even the bed was gone. Everything was gone. What is this supposed to mean?
I threw them out because we don't need them anymore.
Not needed? What am I supposed to do now? When I raised my voice, Ted grimaced. Then he looked away and sighed.
I guess. I'm tired of supporting you.
What do you mean? I'm your wife. As I retorted, Ted got annoyed and suddenly raised his voice.
Do I need to spell it out? Stop leeching off me, you deadbeat.
For over 20 years, I thought I had been devoted to Ted. Yet, this is what he really thought of me. I wasn't leeching off him. I was just devoted to him. Despite thinking this, I couldn't find the words. As my strength drained away, Ted continued.
Now that Ryan is working, you have no reason to leech off me, right?
But
Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses.
Ted raised his voice. Oh, it's no use. My feelings didn't reach him. Just as I thought this, I heard a snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that bound my heart breaking. At the same time, my feelings for Ted began to fade. We were spouses just moments ago, now we're like strangers. Ted had been using me from the start. He never loved me. If he did, he wouldn't blatantly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. No, I must utterly defeat him. With my resolve set, I looked up and stared directly at Ted.
What? You got a problem?
No, if you want me to leave, I'll just do that. I slammed the living room door with force, heading to my room. But there was nothing of mine left. Not a single piece of clothing remained.
You won't find anything. I had the junk removal service take it away.
Which service did you use?
There's a flyer over there. That one.
I picked up the flyer that was on the floor. As I dialed the number, I told Ted, I'm going to make you regret this. With that, I immediately left the house. Soon the call connected. After I explained the situation, they understood right away. It seemed they had felt something was off with Ted's actions. So the junk removal company had kept everything as they collected it. I'll be right over. Thank you. I thanked them politely and hung up. Then I went to the company's location. After thanking them, they helped move my stuff into a storage unit I had just rented. I was relieved to see my belongings were safe. This isn't going to end without consequences. Grinding my teeth, I called Ryan. I briefly explained the situation and then added, So, I've decided to move out based on the assumption we're getting a divorce. Ryan should be prepared for that too, okay?
Oh, got it. Bye.
Ryan hurriedly ended the call. He seemed scared. Was I that angry? I wondered, tucking my phone into my bag. Then I headed to a nearby business hotel. Actually, I had already decided where I was moving. The reason was simple. I had been planning to discuss divorce with Ted soon. Getting a divorce and moving there. That was my plan for starting a new life. Well, things just moved up a bit earlier than planned. So honestly, I wasn't in trouble. It was just a matter of my plans moving up by a couple of weeks. Living in a hotel for 2 weeks. What a waste. Can't help it, though. But as a housewife, I still think it's wasteful. Maybe I should bill him for the hotel too? Well, whatever it is, be prepared, Ted. I muttered to myself before starting to work on the plans I had made for after the divorce. So, I started living in a business hotel, and about 10 days had passed. I was having lunch, and Ted called. I answered the phone. Immediately, Ted raised his voice.
You took my money.
Huh? What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. It's about your father's hospital bills. The hospital just called saying they need to be paid.
Oh, that. I responded with a sigh. You should pay them. It's not my problem anymore since you kicked me out.
I've been transferring your living expenses. It was supposed to come out of that.
That's true. But that bank book is with you now, isn't it? I replied with a calm face. However, there was no money in the account. Knowing this made me unable to stop smirking.
The passbook is there, but there's no money in it. That's why I'm saying you stole it.
I didn't steal anything.
Don't lie. Who else could use it?
Don't you think the amount you transferred was too little? I said with disbelief. It was just low from the start. If there's no money for the hospital bills, why not use your allowance?
My allowance?
Ted started to panic clearly. He thought I didn't know. Ever since we were married, Ted had been giving me handwritten pay stubs. That was because he was skimming part of his salary so I wouldn't find out. In other words, the money he skimmed was going into his allowance. I once asked your father what your salary was.
So that,
He seemed puzzled, but he told me. So, I know you've been taking money. When I told him this, Ted fell silent. He said nothing. Leaving a long silence, I thought the phone had disconnected. But then Ted suddenly shouted,
What's wrong with me spending the money I earn? It's your fault for running through the money I gave you.
Sure. And then?
We're getting a divorce. I'll demand alimony. You need to pay back the money you spent.
At that, I couldn't help but smirk. This was the confirmation I needed. Now Ted couldn't wriggle out of it. I replied cheerfully, Oh, thank you. I wanted a divorce too. Come to my house so we can discuss the divorce.
Oh, no, because,
You want a divorce, right? I've also got proof of you cheating. I couldn't see him, but Ted must have blanched. His voice was tense.
evidence of infidelity? What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. I have photos.
Evidence photos?
I could imagine Ted floundering. Suppressing my laughter, I continued. Then, I'll give you the address, and let's talk in detail next Sunday. I unilaterally provided a certain location's address, and then quickly hung up. I've successfully pushed for a divorce. Now, if I can make him apologize. Honestly, that would be the most challenging part. I steeled myself for it. And on the promised Sunday, I was at the meeting place before the appointed time. He should be arriving soon. As I looked around, I caught sight of Ted in the corner of my eye. Over here. I called out, waving my hand. And Ted looked up, startled.
Here? This place?
Yes, I gave you the address, didn't I?
But whose mansion is this?
Ted looked around behind me. There stood a mansion worth about $10 million. It was much larger than a normal house, complete with a garden. It had 3 floors, a basement, and even a home theater. Luxury cars were parked in the built-in garage. Pointing at the mansion, I smiled. This is my house. It's new, so it's nice and clean.
What? Your house?
Yes, I was planning to live here after the divorce, so I started building it a while ago. Indeed, the place I had called Ted to was my newly built home. Naturally, Ted, who thought of me as just a housewife, was utterly shocked. I pushed him from behind and led him into the house. I led Ted into the living room. Let's have our discussion then. This is my lawyer. I introduced my lawyer, who was waiting inside. But Ted was hardly in a state to talk. He was nervous and kept looking around constantly. He didn't even glance at the photos of his infidelity laid out on the table. Moreover, he didn't respond when spoken to, making it clear we couldn't have a proper discussion. Eventually, Ted muttered, as if asking,
How did you afford such a house?
that's what he was curious about. I answered anyway. I just bought it, you know?
Lies. How can a housewife afford this?
To buy a house worth $10 million, you'd typically need an annual income of around $150,000. But I do have that income. So I answered calmly, I earn that much. Got any problem with that?
No, but how?
I started helping out a friend's company, and before I knew it, things just took off like this. The story goes back a few years. When my father was hospitalized and we had disputes, I decided to divorce. That's when I began preparing for divorce and first looked for a job. After a divorce, I couldn't survive without work. So, I looked for a job that would allow me to live independently. However, good jobs aren't easy to come by. So, I consulted my best friend, Susan.
Why don't you help me with my work?
Work? What do you do?
Aquaculture on land.
Land-based aquaculture involves artificially creating pool-like facilities and farming in them. It has its drawbacks, but also benefits, such as preventing marine pollution, a nature-friendly way of farming. Susan's father started it, and now she has taken over.
So, you started working there?
Ted asked cautiously. Once I began helping, the business suddenly started doing well. I mainly handled negotiations and clerical work. But Susan said that it was a huge help. Then, I was promoted to an executive position. It was all by chance, but I believe luck is a part of skill. Hearing my story, Ted slumped down. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly looked up.
All right, let's forget about the divorce. How about we start over?
What is this guy talking about? I thought as I replied coldly. Huh, save your nonsense for when you're asleep.
No, I'm serious. I really want to start over with you.
Ted pleaded passionately. But I knew he was just after my money. So I raised an eyebrow and shot back. I don't want someone who cheats and someone who neglects his father.
About my dad.
Shut up. You probably don't know, but I was the one paying for your dad's hospital bills. Ted had only been giving me a small amount of money. After covering food, utilities, and other expenses, there was never anything left. He only gave me such a small amount of money. There was no way I could cover my Phil's hospital bills with that. Initially, I managed to scrape together the funds, but once I started working, I used my salary. Despite that, you never listened to me and never visited your father.
Well, that's...
How can I trust someone like you? I shouted, making Ted shrink back. Then my lawyer began discussing alimony. Ted was silent. His head hung low. Eventually, he signed the divorce papers and agreed to pay $30,000 in alimony. Now that the divorce is final, you'll be responsible for your dad's hospital bills.
Yeah.
Ted replied reluctantly. At least he didn't argue. I was relieved. I finally sent Ted away. It's finally over. The only regret I had was not getting an apology from Ted. But I had one last move. If I used it, Ted would definitely apologize. Thinking that, I couldn't help but smile. A few days later, on my way home from visiting the company, I heard a voice behind me.
Hey, Karen.
Turning around, I saw Ted. Don't call me so familiarly. We're divorced now.
Shut up. What did you do?
Ted was looking at me with a red face. From his reaction, I realized that story must have come up at the company. I smiled as I replied, "What do you think I did?"
Stop messing around. Tell me what you did. How did you get me fired?
Ted stomped his foot. His reaction was so amusing that I couldn't help but smile. "You brought it on yourself. It's the punishment for cheating with your company's secretary." Ted's mistress was a secretary at his company. He thought he could do whatever he wanted because he was the president. So, after the divorce was finalized, I reported the affair to my FIL. While he was disappointed about the divorce, he was furious at Ted's actions. When I showed him the photos of the affair, he got even angrier. He then said to me,
I'm transferring all my shares in the company to you, Karen.
"To me? Wouldn't it be better to give them to Ted's brother?"
No, I'm giving them to you. I want you to remove Ted from the president's seat.
Here's the deal. My FIL's company is a corporation. The selection of the president and executives requires a decision by the shareholders' meeting. Of course, the board of directors could also make the decision. However, my FIL's company isn't a large corporation, and my FIL owns most of the shares. This means he can decide things on his own. It's common in small companies for the president to hold the majority of shares. So, if I received all his shares, I could exercise voting rights on my own. However, I didn't decide to remove Ted. I told his brother about receiving the shares and reported Ted's affair. The rest was up to his brother. Your brother acted in the best interest of the company.
That jerk. Why did he do what you said?
He didn't do what I said. He did what was best for the company. Ted collapsed to the ground and mumbling apologies.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
No way.
I'll be jobless and homeless.
Not my problem. It's all his fault. Even if you apologize, I won't forgive you.
Please, forgive me. I'm begging you.
Ted continued to apologize profusely on the spot. I turned my back on him. Sorry, but there's nothing I can do.
Why not? If you own the shares.
I sold them to your brother and his wife. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I heard Ted sobbing, but I walked away, pretending not to hear. After being removed as president, Ted had to leave the company. If he had been a dedicated employee, he might have stayed. But he only got in because of his father and acted arrogantly the whole time.
I work as an employee? No way.
That's what he supposedly said. So, as soon as he was dismissed, he was kicked out. I heard he's now working part-time at a convenience store, but at his age, finding a new job will be tough. He's likely to face a penniless old age, filled with deep regret. As for me, the divorce allowed me to focus more on my work. I don't think there's any talk of remarriage. But I do have a few male colleagues. Perhaps spring will come again for me. It was during these thoughts I received a call from Ryan.
I'm bringing my girlfriend over next time.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. I may have failed in my marriage, but I don't want the same for Ryan. But I'm sure he'll be fine. Ryan is much more responsible than I ever was.